It was one beautiful, sunny day. It was a school exam. And it didn't take long, said one student. That's because you just stared at the paper and didn't think about answering the questions. I know, grinned one of them. But suddenly they heard the hum of cars. One of them turned and looked surprised. A convoy was passing with lots of armored vehicles and weapons. The usual students were sitting in the backs of the cars, in their suits, all driving anxiously somewhere. The students looked at the convoy and were puzzled as they could not understand what was going on for a long time. One of them exclaimed, "They are not even real adventurers! They are just students of one of the specialized schools," the other replied. "Lied! Look at the logo! Silly! They're from the Academy of Warriors!" And indeed, on one of the cars was the emblem of the Academy of Warriors. It was a sword with a shield. A little history, it all happened more than 25 years ago. Suddenly the sky darkened. It became very dark, and not a single ray of light broke through the darkness. The city was in chaos, and all the people were running somewhere. Suddenly, some incomprehensible bright blue portals appeared in the sky from where thousands of dragons appeared. They were flying and spewing fire. A real horror was happening. One of them was so huge that it was larger than a 100-story building. It sat on one of them and began to roar loudly. All the people looked at it in fear and began to run away sharply. The news started showing what was going on, why and where this panic was coming from. It turned out that there was a similar world to Earth in this universe. But for unknown reasons, there was a violent incident on the second planet, and as a consequence, that planet exploded. Because of the explosion, the remnants of that planet began to be attracted to our Earth. Comets and meteorites fell and destroyed our entire planet. And suddenly, in the center of Japan, a huge tree of unprecedented size appeared. It was larger than any building on our Earth. This incident was called the phenomenon of adhesion, and it was because of this that various monsters appeared on our planet. In addition to dragons, huge snakes began to emerge from the seas. 17% of the entire Earth was affected. Humans lost control over it. Dangerous areas appeared where dragons and different monsters were brutalized. The world began to fight this menace. Special forces arrived, but they were powerless against one monster. He was blood red in color, had one horn and something like a mustache. It was fully armored and composed of muscle and could finish off anyone it saw. And these areas were eventually called dungeons. These monsters evolved. The first horned terror appeared. It had one horn. It had a category B strength. It was less hardy. Their categories differed according to the strength of the monster. They had one or more horns. And in this skirmish, there was one fighter he fought with this monster. He started firing his weapon, but the monster was very fast and bulletproof. He got to the warrior in a second and took him down with one blow. Because of such mutilation from the blow, he was thrown back into the wall he punched through. The men didn't have enough time to prepare to face these monsters. Against this monster, humans had the following characteristics: strength, D, endurance, D, agility, D, agility, D. D, though he was trained, he was far behind these monsters. Humans did not have the skills and abilities to fight them. But people were lucky this disaster was not the only one that hit our world. Some miracle came too, and it gave people inhuman strength. This fighter stood up after such a powerful blow. He possessed a power superior to this monster. He continued to attack it, but the man was stronger. He easily got away from the blow and boiled him to the ground that the monster died. But unfortunately, not everyone got this power, and it was different for each person. These people were nicknamed the Chosen Ones. They decided to train themselves and their bodies. After hundreds of hours of training, people decided to fight back the monsters. There were many monsters and different kinds. Some of them had 3 horns. They were strong monsters. Some were weak. Some of them took human form. The super soldiers began to form an army to regain control of the dungeons. They were dubbed special agents of work just for that purpose. They were also known as adventurers. During the long fights, the people realized that they couldn't be defeated with firearms. They acquired swords, and so began the Age of Dungeons, as well as the Age of Adventurers. The adventurers fought fierce battles against monsters from an alien planet. The entire world praised as well as inspired by their strength. Soon after the victory, organizations dedicated to the training of adventurers were established. The best center on the entire planet for training teenagers was in the Republic of Korea. This all took place over 25 years, and the best school was just there. The most famous military high school. Let's go back to today's day. The students were still standing and looking at Convoy. Everyone was talking about something, but two of them knew a lot about this school. They were speculating and sharing their thoughts. One of them thought that the test at this school was a dungeon sweep. The other asked, did they get permission for this? What if they die? They are so sure of themselves, there must be a reason why they were admitted to this school. Someone shrieked, wow. The girls by the side of the road didn't take their eyes off of him. He was beautiful, he had glistening skin. Everyone looked closer and realized. It was an elf of mixed bloods. He looked something like a human, but at the same time had long ears and long fingers. The students wondered, what the hell is that? Don't you know him? He often appears on TV. It's Ji-Joon Choi. His father is a famous adventurer and his mother is an elf. Everyone thinks he's a genius, and people claim he'll join the high ranks of adventurers when he graduates from school. He was 17 years old. His freshman year was a senior soldier, was on a sortie 14 times. The guys didn't understand what they saw in him. The guys decided to invite Jaren to go out with them tonight. They asked, are you working tonight? We heard your girlfriend, Juji, went to karaoke with her friends. He said, I'm sorry, I have a shift tonight. I hope you guys have fun. They were surprised and asked him to skip work and go with them. But he refused. He said goodbye to them, wishing you a good day, and left. One of the friends scolded the other for his stupid offer to skip work. You know what Jaren is doing it for, don't you? His father is sick, and he has to take care of him every day, and also work hard because he has to pay the bills. And he had debts for May and June totaling 302,521,200 yuan. He wrote to his boss asking how was his day and offered him a job. Because of his debts, he agreed and went to him. As he walked down the street and was noticed by Joon Choi, Jaren resented that he did not want to go to work for the weather was fine outside, and he just wanted to have fun with his friends. He went down into the abandoned dungeon, stepped over the hole, lifted the barrier tape, and walked on. There he met his boss. With him was another of their clients and bodyguard. He was Pilg. He was 37 years old, working as a broker. Nice to meet you, Jaren said. The client was indignant. Is this some kind of joke? I thought you were nominating your best employee. And he is the best, replied his boss, sitting in his chair and smoking a cigarette. The customer exclaimed, you think I'm stupid? Listen to me, son of a fucking dog. I didn't come here for you to cheat me. Surprised, the boss replied, are you a little harsh? Get this child out of my sight. Get me someone who's really good at this job. Otherwise, I'll make you both regret it, he already shouted to his bodyguard. Hey, big guy! To which Jaren asked, are you an adventurer? Oops, I'm sorry, I think you were an adventurer. That's why you're stupidly standing behind that old man. The guard turned. No need to continue this conversation. I'm sure the broken arms and legs will teach this boy a lesson. The guard slammed his fist against his fist and moved toward Jaren. Was it Pilg, the former silver-ranked adventurer of 34 years, has been in the dungeons 81 times? Yes, I knew you would settle everything, Pilg, if you want to kneel and beg until he did nothing. How scary. What should I do? Asked Jaren. He was 17 years old, returned from the dungeons 371 times. The battle began, and the boss still sat there smoking cigarette after cigarette. The client looked at him indignantly and objected. Hey, boss, looking from under his forehead, turned to the customer. And at that moment, Pulg and Jaren were getting ready to fight. He glared angrily at Jaren while the guy was warming up. There was a verbal altercation between the client and the boss. You're the one who got scared when they said boss, to which the customers replied. You're the one who should be scared. This guy has a very bad temper. The reason for his dismissal was not because of injuries, but because he assaulted a teammate. If you think he's going to go easy on him because he's just a kid, we're going to end up having to clean up his corpse. Jared asked, I don't get it. Assaulting a teammate isn't scary. That way you'd be the real culprit. I'm in no position to judge you, though, he elbowed. A sinister aura was flying around Pulg. He was 3 heads taller than Jaren. Because of these insults, he wanted to blow his head off. and afterwards said this scum only pulled me down. I just threw out the trash. Jaren was stunned, but soon joked and garbage disposal. So that's what you mean. So you know very well that you are garbage. The boss's side laughed as the customer did not understand why he was sassing him. The guard could not stand it and struck the first blow. This blow was very powerful and lightning fast that the air around shook. But Pulg didn't understand what happened. Attacking me out of the blue is rude, said Jaren, dodging the blow. The guard decided to deliver a crushing push with his second hand. But the guy swung his leg lightly, striking the guard in the jaw. The push was powerful, but not as powerful as the Pulg itself. The customer could not believe his eyes that such a kid could hit an adventurer. Pulg was stunned by Jaren's punch and didn't understand what was going on. Jaren continued, "It was unexpected. From the look of you, I thought you'd be tougher." The guard gripped his jaw with his hand and glared angrily at his opponent. He thought the teenage smuggler was just a kid. But his reflexes said otherwise. His punch was similar to that of a professional. The client was sweating from his head, realizing that the Pulg might be about to lose. "Look over there. It was just one punch, but the guy's good." Pulg grabbed himself by the shirt and ripped it off. Pulg was too powerful, and he was probably a tank. And he said, "Whatever cheap tricks you decide to use, you're still a smuggler." The big guy got angry. He used his power 100. His skin petrified, his muscles got bigger, and there was a very dark aura around him. According to the abilities he received, each adventurer had his own skills and had his own role. The tank possessed iron skin, the strength of a giant, and increased body mass. Pulg furiously exhaled all the air. The atmosphere became even more tense. "So this is the real adventurer," said Jaren. The adventurer flailed his arms at Jaren in full fury. He jumped at him, but Jaren was able to dodge. Under him, a big hole was formed. The concrete started to crack, and many splinters flew. He kept hitting him, but Jaren kept ducking, and finally Pulg lost control and started hitting and destroying everything around him. He punched a huge hole in the wall with a single blow. His physical strength is about the level of a decent truck. If he pushes a man, all the bones in his body will be broken. The boss asked him to be quicker and prevent all the destruction. He threatened to cut his salary. The tank was confident that victory was on his side and began to advance on Jaren. "I'll tell you what, your pathetic tricks can't penetrate the body of a professional." "That doesn't sound so bad," answered Jaren, grabbing the rebar lying next to him. That punch was going to decide the outcome of the fight. Jaren got into a stance and was ready to counterattack, and once again Pulg lunged at him. It was the most powerful blow in his arsenal. He was ready to kill for his ignorance. Jaren dodged the blow, and with a lunge, like a samurai, he struck him. For he knew that a creature that could concentrate a powerful destructive force in one point would deliver a crushing blow. That lunge was so powerful and strong that the shockwave took on a noble blue color. Pulg could fight no further. He simply fell down, spitting up blood. The client couldn't believe his eyes that such a young guy could knock down an experienced adventurer. Jaren stood in a samurai stance and stared at the breathless body of the Pulg. Pulg said in a hoarse voice, "Where did you learn that?" "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're thinking, but you're wrong." But there is a possibility that he saw my father. Holding his head remembered Jaren. Depending on the adventurer's skills and results, they are given the following ranks from lowest to highest: stone, copper, silver, and gold. Depending on the rank, there are various benefits, such as permission to enter dungeons and reduced taxes. Despite the fact that the world is in chaos and unprecedented creatures have come to our Earth, useful artifacts have also come to our world. These artifacts were in dungeons guarded by the same mighty demons, and to get them, you had to fight them. But before they could be taken outside, they had to be tested. It was because many of them possessed incredible power. If that power fell into the wrong hands, there would be trouble. That is why the Association of Adventurers carried out these inspections. But there were illegals who broke these rules, and they lured adventurers who did not want to pay these huge taxes. A little boy was walking down a dark corridor, the bright rays of the sun shining through the thin walls. And he reasoned, when I was a little boy, my father was the best hunter. This boy's name was Jaren. He opened the door and looked out into the garden. There stood his father. All around it was overcast, though it was summer. The lawn was green, and in the center of the garden his father was shining brightly. His name was Yusan. He was a pumped-up and brave hunter. He had a lot of scars on his body, and he used a long and sharp pike as his weapon. He was the first monster rebel who had superpowers. He was the first generation of heroes, the very first hunters. These men were legends that went down in history. Yusan has buried most of his comrades. In arms! He has seen so much death. It's impossible to imagine, and he wouldn't wish anyone to go through that. But in fact, those times could be called hell for hunters. At that time, there was a lack of information about what was going on in the world. Monsters lived in tunnels and dungeons, in the darkest places to hide from the sun, and hunters had to storm these dark places. The first time they wandered into such a dungeon, there was Gekkan Mullis waiting for them. He was something very unusual. He looked like a worm with a big mouth and a lot of teeth. He was armored, so firearms were no problem for him. This monster, he began to spew poisonous flames right out of his mouth. His comrade was unable to dodge and died, but my father was very strong. He had a titanium alloy axe in his hands. But even he could not withstand the poison. He simply melted away from the monster's attack. At that moment, the monster was preparing for his next attack to spit poison at him. Yusan squeezed tightly what was left of his axe in his hand and jumped right into the monster's head. Concentrating all his energy in one powerful blow, he struck directly into the gecko's skull. The first generation of hunters had to risk their own lives using trial and error. At the sound of the battle, the three hunters arrived from the tunnel. They looked young with horror and wonder in their eyes at what had happened. They saw the corpse of the monster that my father had killed. He was sitting next to it, holding his head and grieving over the fact that he had once again lost his partner. All hunters who survived gained experience and achievements. For the next generation, Yusan stood up, leaving behind the monster. He was completely in his blue blood, but he was ready for it. And after a while, Usan matured from an ordinary hunter into a dragon slayer. This nickname was given to the first man to slay a dragon. He struck him many sharp blows despite his armored body. An ordinary recruit would not have been able to deal with him because it required great experience, nerves of steel, and also needed to be very brave. Father alone could handle 2 dragons at once. The whole of Japan knew about him. He was on TV. Everyone was thrilled that they had such a hero who could slay any monster. He was the #1 hunter in Asia and in this world. He honed his punches by concentrating his power in peak, which he always had with him. He was unrivaled and stronger than all the others. But during training, his father started spitting blood. Jaren ran up to him to find out what had happened, but the father told him to stay away. Jaren was covered in tears. He didn't understand what was going on, why his father was in pain, but it was all caused by poison. His father ended up in the hospital because of poisoning, which he got in the dungeon, and it was impossible to heal him, and he has been bedridden ever since. Time went by, and his body was no longer as pumped up. He was getting older, but he still wanted to overcome this difficulty. But over the years, and his physical condition has reached its limit. He was lying in bed all the time, and he was also spitting blood. While he was in the hospital, his colleagues came to him, and even though he had risked his life for them and had achieved everything on his own, they were very mean to him. They handed him a letter and left. He hoped it would be some kind of help, but it turned out they stole everything he had accomplished. All his accomplishments and possessions were brazenly stolen. Yusan lay in the hospital ward and could not imagine that his own friends, or rather colleagues whom he considered friends, could do this to him. He threw away the letter and just held his head. My son came to visit and saw him in that state. Jaren had already grown up. He started going to elementary school and looked about 13 years old. Time went on, and the world began to forget the name of the dragon slayer Yusan. The father had grown old. His black hair had turned white ash. He was completely gray with the physique of an old man. He lost everything he had, tormented by an incurable disease, and could only look at the bright rays of sunlight that streamed through his window. Meanwhile, Jaren won a hard-fought battle. Pilg lay breathless on the ground. Jaren simply walked away from him by throwing away his weapon. "Well, that wasn't hard," said the boss, looking at the old man. The client stared wide-eyed at the adventurer lying on the ground. "He lost to some green puppy. The thing is, she wasn't a good hunter. Shit ran out of cigarettes," said the boss. Jaren came up and said, seeing him bragging about beating up his own colleague, "You can tell at once his low level." And with a slow step, he approached the customer. "There are only 2 cases of good hunters resigning. Either they are no longer physically able to continue this work due to injuries, or they died during the raid. I don't know how much you pay him, but if it's more than the lowest rate, I advise you to fire him," said Jaren, putting on his outerwear, which he took off before the fight so as not to get blood on it. "If he's only chasing weight, then anyone can do that." The boss hugged the client to get the job and said, "Hey, that's a bit of a mouthful. Please understand our dear client," and added, "And it is also meant that the fee for the service will be twice as high." "What kind of nonsense?" the client objected to, with a sneering expression on boss's face. "We don't do anything for free." "I see. That's what we'll do," the client replied. After the fight, Jaren was sipping water, and the boss asked, "Heard about the celestial wasp?" Jaren spit out whatever was in his mouth because he was surprised by such words. "I can't believe I have to fight her. It's too much." Wiping the rest of the water from his mouth, Jaren said, "The heavenly wasp was the most fierce monster in the flesh. This monster is known as the most dangerous monster, not only on the Korean peninsula, but in the whole world. These monsters lived in the old Joindo area. In this area, all the buildings were covered with cobwebs. Everything was destroyed, and there were so many hives in the area. This area was so dangerous that no humans lived in it. You could say that there was nothing alive there. This area has become the highest level of difficulty in Korea. It's not easy for an adventurer to fight even a single specimen, so for a smuggler you can consider there is no chance," said the boss. "And what if we're talking about a white-ranked hunter?" asked Jaren, surprised. "If you believe what this uncle says, there was a major raid yesterday, which was not covered by the media." The client tried to lift the adventurer, kicking his body with his feet and muttering something to him. The state supported the military. A team of 7 white-ranked hunters was assembled. These hunters with ammunition and tanks went to this most dangerous area to clean it up. All the Korean stars are here, so to speak, but it only takes a couple of them to show up. It's already being shouted about in all the newspapers. Their goal was to destroy the wasps, but it didn't work out. They were going to hunt the uterus. It was a very large individual, larger than a 10-story building. It had wings, stings like a wasp, long arms with sharp nails. One of the 7 adventurers has appropriated the royal jelly of the heavenly wasps, coaxed one of his men into a special operation, and smuggled the item out. "What kind of jelly?" asked Jaren. "Royal jelly. It's the nutrient the wasps use to nourish the new uterus." Nutrient? A white-ranked hunter decided to go smuggling for some nutrient, held onto his head Jaren, and didn't understand why he was doing all this. The royal jelly of the celestial wasps has appeared several times before. And as far as I know, if a person eats, it can literally escape the hands of death and come back to life. There was hope in his eyes. He planned to kill the uterus to get gel. Oh, after all, it was the only way he could save his father. Jaren and his boss went down into the dungeon, which looked like an abandoned subway station. The whole place was ruined. According to the rules of the association, all alleys and passageways to the dungeons must be strictly controlled. That was the official position of the Association of Hunters and the government. But that was no problem for our couple. They reached their destination without a problem. The boss was, as always, smoking a cigarette, all because no one was guarding this aisle. The boss stood in front of a huge iron door, which was scrawled with ceiling inscriptions. Not everyone could open it at all. Boss possessed a special power different from that of a Jaren, and he concentrated the energy in his right hand and raised it to the door. Magic began to happen. A blue aura appeared around him. The air shuddered. Blue energy enveloped the doors. The boss had good control over his power and could talk calmly. He turned to Jaren with the words, "I always say be careful not to doubt." especially this time. Jaren made a strange face and thought to himself, maybe stop teaching me because I've been there more than once. And the boss exhaled smoke from behind his mouth right into the guy's face. Jaren couldn't stand the smell. It disgusted him. He started waving his hand to get rid of the smoke and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" he said in a disgruntled voice. "I wanted you to pay attention to me. It seemed to me that you were thinking of something else and not answering. Is that what this is all about? The boss was thinking about the trophy you can get if you defeat a wasp. A potion that can bring a dead man back to life," said the boss. "Those words seem to be bugging you, don't they?" Unhappy. Who cares if it bothers me or not? Jaren stood there in his full uniform. It was all black, so that in case of danger he could hide from sight of the monsters. Behind his back was a weapon that resembled that spade his father had fought with. Jaren walked to the door, put his hand on it, and with great effort began to push it open. Even if it is a cure that no such thing exists, he thought, and kept pushing on the door. It still wouldn't be able to heal my father. The door opened and rays of light began to break through from the other side. There was a sunny glow on his face. A pleasant, fresh air was blowing from the other side, and his eyes were filled with enthusiasm and determination. His mind was spinning with words. If there was any way, he wouldn't have lost hope, and the doors opened completely and filled the darkness of the subway station with bright light. He stepped to the other side, the searing sun blinding our smuggler. He raised his hand over his eyes to cover the sun and see what surrounded him. He stood on a rock that was enveloped in unknown plants that resembled huge rose stalks with thorns that had been crossed with vines. He stood looking into the distance. There was a mask on his face, for it was not clear what awaited him there. There was not enough information about this side, and there might have been an infection there that the human organism could not cope with. After the merging of the planets, dungeons appeared all over the earth. There were a huge number of them, but the largest were in Korea. One of them, the very first, was where Jeju Island merged with a hot rock that resembled a volcano. A fiery plasma was constantly erupting from it, and only a few people could be near that place. After all, such temperatures could burn you alive. Jaren pulled a mask over his eyes that would protect his eyes from damage. The second was where the jungle merged, with part of the area Yoido in Seoul. The whole area turned into the future, as if all humans had left the place and nature had taken over. Green flora enslaved the buildings. They began to crumble, and one forest grew all around. This was the old Barami area. It was a low-level dungeon, Danger D+. This was a huge dungeon with the Yoido district at its center, as well as the Mappo, Yonsan, and Yondipno districts. This dungeon had not yet been cleared, and many hunters had said goodbye to their lives in it. One of the smuggler's men delivered the goods to the rendezvous point. The connection seems to have been severed when he arrived there. It is unlikely he took the goods for himself. Most likely he was wounded or in trouble. He lived to the rendezvous point and left blood prints behind him. The boss suggested he was probably wounded by sky wasps when he ran away. Your job is to check the scene and fetch the goods if he's there. If we continue our conversation, those were the boss's words. Jaren looked at him, and the man with the cigarette added, "Stop thinking about strange things and concentrate on work." He stood leaning against the wall, smoke coming out of the smoldering cigarette in his mouth. With a smile on his face, Jaren asked, "Do you think I wouldn't run away with the subject?" Smoking the boss replied, "No, you're not a fool to do that," and exhaled the smoke. "Just asking you to be careful." Jaren jumped down the cliff, grabbing the rope so he wouldn't crash. The boss shouted in his wake, "I told you that the royal jelly of celestial wasps is a very expensive item. It's not just people who go after it." He approached the ground. The tether tightened. It wasn't his first jump. He regrouped and landed neatly but spectacularly in the thick of the forest. It was so dark that the sun's rays could barely penetrate that gloom. He stood in the center of the forest, and the smell wafted all around him, and his thoughts were interrupted by what he saw on the ground. "Ah, shit," he said, and looked between the trees. There was an enormous giant's footprint on the ground. Trees of enormous size from another planet were growing nearby, but even they seemed small in comparison to this footprint. "Crazy," said Jaren. At this smell, monsters will gather. We need to get out of here soon. Somewhere near this place, something was going on. Birds in the area started to fly away. Some loud noises could be heard. There was some girl running away. She had the logo of the Academy of Adventurers on her t-shirt. She was sweating with horror. She hid behind a tree, covering her mouth so as not to make unnecessary noises. This one was a black-haired elf, with a quiver of arrows and a bow behind her back. It was Shinzurome, a first-year student of the High School of Heroes. She found herself in the most terrifying situation of her life. She stood in utter terror, her body trembling to play her part. She thought the midterm exam would not be difficult. She looked out from behind the tree to see if the man she was running from was following her. But something appeared before her. A dark aura thickened around her, and fear. It was very frightening. A silhouette appeared, the silhouette of a huge creature that left a huge mark on the ground that Jarin saw. It was a monster that should not have been in this place. She squinted her eyes, hoping that this would save her and this monster wouldn't notice her. She opened her right eye to look. She was terrified. She didn't understand what it was or how it was here. This exam was supposed to be simple. Its purpose. You had to collect as many coins as possible, which were hidden in different corners of the dungeon. It was a practical exam with the lowest level of difficulty. She already thought the trouble had passed her by, but the monster looked out from behind the tree and found the elfess trying to hide from him. Monsters in this area must be weak and had almost no intelligence. She saw that she had been spotted. Sweat began to drip from her face. She staggered in horror and looked up. The monster had struck very hard. It blew down the tree she was hiding behind. A very violent shockwave spread, and the tree shattered into splinters. Luckily, she was able to dodge the blow. She decided to run from there, but there was no way. If there was any chance of success, it would be a miracle, she thought. She decided to fight him, despite the fact that she had a slim chance. She loaded her bow with 3 arrows and drew her bowstring to shoot it. The monster was very huge, and with just his breath, he left everything around him without oxygen. Clutching at the trees, it moved toward its target. The huntress fired 3 arrows at him at once. Her shot was a killer for the monsters that were supposed to live there, but this case was an exception. He was not supposed to be there. She was aiming at her opponent's vulnerabilities. She shot straight into his eyes, but he blocked them with his hand. If this monster had no intelligence, it would not have been able to defend itself. The arrows pierced his arm, but did not do much damage. He became enraged, though it was an inconsequential threat to him. She stood amazed, the strength of its skin more than the armor she had encountered and studied in textbooks. The monster prepared himself, raised his arm above his head to strike hard, again launching a strong counterattack at her. Because of its size, it was not known for the swiftness of its movements. The archer jumped away from him again. No matter how many shots you fire, you can't penetrate him. But she had no choice but to fight to survive. With another volley, she loaded 3 arrows. This one was more powerful than the last, the arrows slicing through the air and hitting the target. She struck him in the chest, lacking accuracy because of the fear that gripped her. All 3 arrows hit his chest, but they couldn't even penetrate the top layer of skin. This further enraged him. He stuck his tongue out, drooling from his mouth, wanting to get at her in every way he could. My attacks had no effect on him. He didn't even have to dodge or block the blows. He dashed toward her. She made the decision to get close to him. She had a better chance of winning this battle at short range, so her arrows would do more damage and be much more accurate. This time she loaded her bow with 1 arrow to increase the accuracy of her shot. Shinzurome, that was the heroine's name, also possessed magic. She adopted the archer stance. She could apply effects to the tips of her arrows. Such people were called mage archers. This was a technique. The fire shot, one of the ones she wielded. When she fired, her arrow took the form of a fiery shot from a flamethrower, but with very lightning speed. The kinds of magic she can put into her arrows are endless and have no limits. From a distance, it was visible from her shot that a glow appeared over the forest, which was like an explosion, and for total victory she chose explosion, putting as much force and power into it as she could. She calmed down and the fear left her feet. She was sure that this blow was deadly to him. Such a blow would do well for a monster with a 3-star threat level. The light dissipated and she saw. Her arrow missed its target. The monster proved to be very clever. She watched as it clung between the trees. With a gaze filled with rage, it stared at the archer. Fear struck her again. Shinzarome stood in terror, and a bunch of thoughts swirled around in her head. Had he ducked? Before I even shot him? Jumped up, so he knew. I couldn't do it a second time. What do we do now? We've got to run. He jumped to the ground. Everything around him shook, and he ran toward the apprentice. The monster was reaching for her with his hand to grab her. She ran from him, her eyes filled with fear. He was right on his target. Another second, and he would have grabbed. But at that moment, the very miracle that she had been waiting for, all this intense fighting happened. There Jaren appeared, superior in level and skill to her, and delivered a crushing blow to the monster's head. He lost his balance, and the impact caused his body to start backing up. In the clear sky, she saw the silhouette of the man who had saved her from death. He looked like an angel in the flesh. It was Jaren. She looked at him and could not take her eyes off him.